Twilight stretched across the neighborhood like a slow wave, swallowing the edges of the streets and softening the sharp lines of houses that stood in careful rows. The sky burned in fading oranges and purples, painting everything in a surreal glow. The mother appeared at the end of the street, her form distinct, yet somehow unlike anything the human eyes had been trained to see. She walked with a calm that suggested she had traveled far through spaces no one could imagine, and yet there was hesitation in the way her feet touched the concrete, as if she were testing the ground for acceptance. She held the hand of her child, whose small body shimmered faintly like light trapped beneath a thin layer of water. The child's eyes were enormous, dark and luminous, reflecting the dying sun and the shadows of the street lamps that had begun to flicker on. She stopped before a modest house. Her presence alone seemed to pause the evening air. The mother whispered to her child, and the words were soft, melodic, carrying a weight of urgency and hope. She said that if the humans inside did not welcome them, they would leave and find another place where the world could be gentle. The child tilted its head, listening closely, its tiny fingers curling and uncurling around her hand as if testing her resolve. They had walked long distances and through strange lands, where no human foot had pressed, and every step forward was measured with care. The house before them was ordinary, yet in that moment, it seemed like the entire world contained its destiny. The street was silent, but for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a car engine somewhere beyond the curve of the road. The mother's body glowed softly, casting faint light on the porch and the steps like a candle burning against the approaching night. Her eyes scanned the windows, trying to understand the life within the walls, without giving away the foreignness that might scare away the pittids. Inhabitants. She crouched slightly, so her child could see the door up close, and whispered again, in that low voice that carried both warning and invitation. "Stay ready to move," she said, "but do not fear. Here there may be kindness." The child shivered, not from cold but from anticipation. Its small fingers tightened on hers, and it took a careful step forward, feeling the energy of the house pressing back at them as if it could sense the intention of the visitors. The mother allowed a faint smile to touch her lips, a gesture learned from observing many worlds and creatures she had encountered along the way. She understood the fragility of first impressions, the importance of patience, and the subtle power of hope behind. The window's shadows shifted, a curtain moved slightly, revealing a glimpse of the human within. The mother held her child close, whispering again that they must be ready to leave, if unwelcome. But now she also whispered that sometimes even the smallest gesture could open doors to worlds unimagined. The child looked up at her with trust that was both simple and profound, and in that moment the street and the house and the fading sky seemed suspended in waiting. The mother straightened her back and inhaled the scent of the evening, the smell of dry grass and distant rain, and the faint smell of human habitation. She let the silence stretch between them and the house, a momentary bridge of possibility before any decision was made. She whispered once more softly that they would wait just a little longer, and then the world would decide whether it would hold them or let them vanish like the twilight itself. The human inside the house froze mid-step, a strange feeling crawling up the spine, a mixture of curiosity and unease, as if the walls themselves had whispered a secret that could not be ignored. The sound of tiny footsteps outside reached their ears, faint and measured, each one carrying the weight of worlds unknown. They moved toward the door, cautiously, the air thick with anticipation, the kind that makes the skin tingle and the heart beat too fast. The doorknob felt colder than expected under their fingers, as if sensing the presence beyond, and they hesitated, uncertain whether to open and face what waited or retreat into the safety of routine and familiarity outside. The mother held her child a little closer, her eyes soft yet alert, her body poised to respond to any sudden change. She whispered in that melodic tone, again words that carried both warning and comfort, telling the child to breathe and to trust that the human might not be dangerous. The child tilted its head and stared at the door, watching for the slightest movement beyond the thin wooden barrier, their small hand pressed against her side, seeking reassurance that they would not be abandoned in this unfamiliar world. The house seemed to hold its breath, the faint creak of the porch beneath her feet, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening wind became part of a symphony of tension. Stretching out in time, each shadow seemed alive, each window a pair of eyes that could decide the fate of the pair outside. The mother whispered again softly, her voice a thread connecting them in a fragile hope that somehow the human would understand that they meant no harm. The child stepped slightly forward, curious and brave, yet trembling at the same time. It peered at the door as if expecting it to speak back or open on its own. The mother bent lower to whisper directly to its ear the words, Filled with reassurance and gentle caution, she told the child that humans could be wary, but sometimes they could also be kind, and that patience and stillness could open doors invisible to the eye inside the house. The human finally lifted their gaze to the porch and saw the glow of the mother and the faint shimmer of the child. The sight was unsettling, yet mesmerizing. Like seeing a dream walking on solid ground, they felt a strange pull in their chest, a mixture of fear, fascination, and an inexplicable recognition that these beings belonged somewhere, even if not here. They swallowed hard, uncertain what to do, and instinctively stepped back, giving the appearance of retreat while actually preparing to face the unknown. The mother noticed the movement and nodded faintly to her child, signaling them to remain calm. The child mirrored her posture, holding still and silent like a creature made of light and shadow, waiting for a sign. The mother extended her free hand slightly toward the human, a universal gesture of peace. She whispered again that they would leave if unwelcome, but now she added without words, the promise of something rare, a connection that could bridge worlds if allowed. The street around them remained hushed, as if even the wind waited for the next moment to unfold. The faint scent of earth and distant rain wrapped around them, mingling with the subtle presence of the mother and child, creating a tension that was almost tangible. The human stared a long moment at the pair on the porch, feeling a mixture of wonder and fear, and then the door moved slightly, a tiny gap opening, a possibility for what might come next, a choice hovering between retreat and acceptance. The human's eyes stayed fixed on the faint glow at the edge of the porch, the mother and child, waiting with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The gap in the door seemed impossibly small, yet it held the weight of decision, a fragile threshold between fear and curiosity, between retreat and the unknown possibility of connection. The child's eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light, and the human could almost feel the pulse of its small heart echoing through the thin wooden barrier. Mother knelt, slightly lowering herself to the child's level, a silent gesture of protection and guidance. She whispered in tones the human could not comprehend, but somehow understood. Her voice carried patience and quiet hope. She told the child to watch the human and listen for the faintest sign that they might welcome them into their space. The child nodded subtly, a delicate motion, but the human caught it as a signal of awareness and intelligence far beyond anything they could have imagined. Outside, the night deepened, the colors of the sky fading into blues and grays, and the shadows stretched like living things across the porch. The mother's glow seemed to pulse slightly in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the child mirrored it, tiny flickers of light rippling across their skin like water in a stream. They remained motionless, waiting for a response from the human. A response that could change the course of the evening, or send them disappearing into the darkness. In the house, every instinct screamed caution, yet something primal urged the human to stay and look closer. The shimmer of the child and the subtle glow of the mother drew them forward like a moth to a strange and beautiful flame. Their fingers brushed the edge of the door, as if testing whether the moment was real and not a dream born of fatigue or imagination. They inhaled slowly, tasting the crisp night air that seemed to carry the alien scent of another world, and it made their chest tighten. The child stepped forward hesitantly, its small hand inching toward the doorframe, and the mother adjusted her position, whispering encouragement, guiding them like a silent compass. The human felt an unexpected warmth bloom inside, a sense of recognition and curiosity, and something unnameable they had never felt before. The light from the porch painted their floor in pale reflections that moved like spirits dancing just beyond the reach of comprehension. A single leaf drifted down from a tree above, brushing the porch like a quiet applause. The mother's gaze followed it and then returned to the human. She gestured slightly for the child to remain calm, and the child obeyed, waiting for permission to act. The air hung heavy with anticipation. Every sound magnified: the faint creak of the porch board, the rustle of distant leaves, the rhythmic pulse of life outside and within. The human finally exhaled a long, slow breath and reached toward the door, unlocking it slightly, as if granting a small invitation. The mother smiled faintly, a gesture soft yet full of relief, and the child's eyes lit up with cautious excitement. They had not yet crossed fully, but the smallest barrier had been lifted, and it was enough to let possibilities seep in. The street seemed suspended, time slowed, and the night held its breath as the first fragile bridge between worlds began to form. Mother whispered one last time to the child outside, words of patience and hope that the human could not hear, but felt as a presence in their chest. A moment hung in balance, the choice now entirely in human hands. A single gesture could welcome them in or send them fading into the darkness forever. The human opened the door just a crack, and the glow of the mother, and the faint shimmer of the child, spilled into the entryway like liquid light. The mother crouched slightly, keeping her child close. Her eyes gentle yet alert, as if reading the smallest signs from the human. She whispered softly to the child, urging patience and quiet courage while signaling that it was safe to observe and not yet to advance. The child peered forward, its luminous eyes wide, absorbing the colors and shapes. Inside the house, every detail new and strange. Its small hand pressed against the mother's side, seeking both comfort and reassurance. The mother's free hand hovered in a gesture of invitation, yet remained careful to show no sudden movement that might frighten the human. She breathed slowly, feeling the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like honey, but also sensing the faint pulse of curiosity from the other side of the threshold inside. The house, the human, stared at the creatures in disbelief, heart pounding and mind struggling to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they had been taught about the world. The light from the child painted moving patterns across the floor, casting long shadows that seemed alive and beckoning. Every instinct screamed caution, but something deep inside urged them to remain calm and open to what might come. The mother lowered herself further until her eyes were level with the child's, and she whispered once more words of patience and reassurance. She tilted her head subtly, emotion meant to communicate safety and understanding. The child mirrored her posture, holding still and silent, like a small creature of light and shadow poised between fear and trust. The human took a step back, allowing them more space, a silent signal that they could enter if they wished. Their fingers trembled slightly as they held the door wider, and the mother nodded gently as if acknowledging the permission. The child's tiny hand rose in a hesitant wave, and the human felt an unexpected warmth ripple through them, a connection forming without sound, without words, yet impossible to ignore. The mother guided the child forward slowly, their movements deliberate and unhurried like ripples spreading through still water. She whispered again in her melodic voice that they must be ready to retreat if necessary, but that this moment could also be the beginning of understanding. The child stepped lightly onto the threshold, feeling the solid wood beneath its feet, and then paused, looking back to their mother. Mother smiled faintly, a gesture full of calm assurance, and encouraged the child with subtle motions to take another step. The human watched, breath held, fascinated and wary, as the child's small form moved further inside the house like a delicate beam of starlight entering a dark room. Their presence illuminated corners the human had never noticed and seemed to carry a strange promise of new beginnings. The street remained quiet, as if holding its own breath, waiting for the next move. The mother's glow softened her figure, blending with the shadows of the porch, yet her presence remained commanding and protective. She whispered one last word of guidance, and the child followed instinctively, stepping fully inside and letting the door close slowly behind them. The human felt a strange sensation of both relief and wonder as the mother and child now stood fully in their home. The air hummed with the quiet energy of something extraordinary and fragile. A single choice had bridged the gap between worlds, and the evening seemed to hold infinite possibilities for what could follow. The child took its first hesitant steps into the warm interior of the house, its small glowing body casting flickering patterns across the walls and floor. The human watched every movement, fascinated and slightly apprehensive, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The mother followed slowly, close behind, her presence calm and grounding, as if she were a bridge between the strange new visitor and the human who had opened the door. The child paused near the edge of the living room floor, tilting its head as it observed the furniture, the lights, and the strange smells that filled the space. It reached out a tiny hand toward a low table, and then withdrew it quickly, as if testing the rules of this unfamiliar world. The mother crouched near the child, whispering softly, her voice melodic and soothing, telling it that everything here could be observed slowly, and there was no need to rush. The human felt a pull in their chest, as though the child's curiosity had stirred something ancient inside them. They moved closer carefully, hands raised slightly in gesture of peace. The child noticed the movement and flinched only a little, then tilted its head as if studying the human's intentions. Its eyes shimmered softly, reflecting the warm light of the room and the faint glow of the mother behind it. The mother gestured gently with her hand toward the human, and the child mimicked her motion. a careful wave that carried both curiosity and tentative friendliness. The human smiled, faintly, the first small bridge of trust forming between them. A warmth that was unfamiliar, and yet comforting, spread through the room, like sunlight filtering through leaves, and the child seemed to respond instinctively, its small body relaxing. Slightly the child stepped closer to the human, its tiny feet moving carefully across the floor, as if aware of the fragile trust that had been established. Each movement deliberate and slow, a language of motion that needed no words. The mother whispered, encouragement telling the child to observe and not to fear, and the human felt the gentle weight of her presence guiding the interaction, as if she were the conductor of a silent symphony. The human knelt, slowly lowering themselves to the child's level, a gesture meant to show that they were not a threat. The child tilted its head, examining every detail from the strange clothing to the unfamiliar scent and the small, subtle movements that humans made. The human reached out a hand, slowly, not to touch but to invite, and the child inched forward and placed a tiny, glowing hand on the human's fingers. A spark of connection passed between them, a silent communication of curiosity and trust that transcended words. The mother watched closely, ready to intervene, yet knowing this first touch was a crucial step. She whispered softly to the child, telling it to breathe and trust the warmth that radiated from this human being. The child responded subtly, a small nod, and then released the hand. With a flicker of excitement in its eyes, the human laughed softly, a sound full of surprise and delight, and the child mirrored the motion. A delicate sound like a whisper of wind in leaves. The mother allowed herself a quiet smile, recognizing the moment as the first true meeting of hearts between worlds. The room seemed to hum with the energy of possibility, the air alive with tension and fragile joy, as the human and child explored the first moments of understanding. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle motion carried weight and significance. The night outside faded in importance, as the small group remained suspended in this fragile moment of connection. The mother whispered once more, a soft melodic phrase, the meaning layered in tone and feeling, and the child leaned slightly toward the human, a tentative but powerful sign that trust was beginning to grow. She spoke carefully, her words halting like a traveler walking across fragile ice, each sound weighted with hesitation yet burning with urgency. She looked directly at the man before her, and then at the woman who had joined him by the doorway, her eyes filled with both exhaustion and determination. She began by saying she asked for nothing more than the chance to rest. Her body tall but slightly bent from the long journey, the child pressed tightly against her leg as though hiding from the shape of the human home around them. The human father stared at her, unsure if the voice he was hearing belonged to a dream or to some deeper reality that had arrived uninvited. Her language was not fluent, but every word carried clear meaning. She explained she had traveled across spaces wider than imagination, and through dangers unspoken, and she had not come for conquest, nor for claim, but only because she carried her child, and the universe had left her with no other path. The child peeked out from behind her leg, small face shining faintly as though lit by hidden stars, his expression uncertain but his eyes wide with silent pleading. The alien mother touched his head gently and continued speaking. Her tone stronger now. She said they needed nothing grand, not food, not treasures, not even a promise of safety beyond the night. She said all they asked was a corner where fear would not reach them, a place where a mother could close her eyes and know her child would see another sun. Mother bowed her head slightly, her shimmering skin catching the porch light and breaking it into strange glimmers across the walls of the entryway. She said that if they were not welcome, she would turn and leave at once. She would vanish into the shadows without complaint. She would not press nor beg. She whispered that her child must never be forced where hearts did not want them, and in that whisper the man heard not only humility but also pride, the pride of someone willing to walk endless miles for the sake of a single small life. The human father swallowed his fear, his throat dry and his hands trembling, for never had he faced a request that felt so simple yet so immense. The woman at his side clutched his arm, her eyes locked on the child, who now looked back at her with eyes that held no menace, only tired innocence. The silence between the four of them stretched long and heavy like a veil waiting to be lifted. The alien mother did not move. Her stillness was sharper than stone, yet under it trembled something fragile like glass. The child pressed closer, hiding his face once again, as though bracing for rejection. The mother repeated in a softer tone that if this was unwelcome, they would go, that they had always gone, that doors had closed on them before, and they had learned to keep walking. The porch light flickered once, as though the world itself held its breath. The night wind carried a faint hum across the quiet street. And in that moment it was not the strangeness of the visitor that filled the doorway, but the weight of her plea, a plea as old as time. The voice of a mother, asking only for shelter for the child she carried through endless darkness. The father stood frozen, his breath uneven as though the air around him had thickened into stone. The alien mother had spoken her request yet. The weight of it lingered, pressing hard against his chest. His first thought was to close the door, not out of cruelty but out of the raw instinct that whispered danger. Yet his eyes kept slipping back to the child clinging tightly to her side, and he saw, not danger there but fragility and need beside him. The woman of the house tightened her grip on his arm, her eyes sharp and searching, as though she could see into the soul of the visitors before them. She did not speak, but her silence carried meaning, and he felt it as strongly as if she had shouted. She was asking him without words if he would let fear define them, or if he would let compassion rise higher than suspicion. The alien mother stood without motion, waiting, her head slightly lowered, her form still and patient, but in that stillness there was no surrender, only the quiet strength of someone who had carried burdens heavier than mountains. She had learned how to wait, she had learned how to endure the unkind eyes of strangers, and she would endure this moment too. For the sake of the child who pressed against her with trembling hands. The child peeked out again, his eyes like tiny lanterns glowing faintly in the porch light. He did not speak, yet in his gaze there was a question unspoken. Will they turn us away? Will they let us rest? Will they see me as more than a shadow? The woman of the house looked back at him, and in her chest something stirred, an ache of memory, of her own child sleeping softly in the next room, of the countless nights she had worried if she had done enough to keep him safe. The silence stretched long, the father shifting from one foot to the other, his heart pounding loud enough. He wondered if they all could hear it. He thought of the stories he had heard of unknown beings, of the warnings whispered in every age about what comes from the sky, yet none of those stories had ever described a mother holding a child, whispering that they would leave if unwelcome. None had described the sorrow etched deep into eyes that shimmered with starlights. The woman squeezed his arm again, firmer, this time her gaze steady and unblinking, and in that gaze he saw her decision. It was not made of fear, it was not made of hesitation. It was a decision shaped by compassion, by the undeniable truth that no child should be turned away from warmth when night was cold and endless. He understood then that she had already chosen, and he would not defy her. The alien mother waited, still, not daring to hope, not daring to assume, her breath shallow, as though she balanced on the edge of rejection. Yet, when the woman of the house stepped ever so slightly forward and placed her free hand on the doorframe, leaving space between them, it was as if the walls of the world shifted. The gesture was small, yet it carried more weight than any word spoken. It was not an invitation with open arms, but it was not a rejection either. It was a chance, a fragile possibility that the door might not close, that the night might hold a fragment of mercy, and the alien mother saw it and understood, and for the first time since her long journey began, her shoulders lowered just enough to let one breath of relief escape. But the space left in the doorway felt like an unspoken invitation, and yet the alien mother did not rush forward. Her steps remained anchored, as though she feared one wrong motion might shatter the fragile moment the humans had given her. The child tugged at her arm, whispering something too soft for the humans to hear, and she lowered her head close to his ear, answering in a voice steady but trembling with quiet relief. She told him they would take this step together only if his heart was ready. The father shifted uneasily, watching them, his pulse still uneven, the air between them thick with hesitation. He could not yet silence the voice of instinct inside that whispered danger, even as another voice, louder and truer, reminded him that what stood before him was not a soldier, not a conqueror, but a mother desperate to protect her child. The woman beside him tightened her hand on his sleeve, urging him with silence to trust what his eyes were seeing rather than what his fears imagined. Slowly the alien mother bent her tall frame just enough to meet her child at eye level. She pressed her hand to his small shoulder, guiding him gently forward, her every movement cautious, deliberate, respectful of the space she was entering. The child hesitated, his glowing eyes flickering from the strange room beyond the threshold to the humans who stood guard like statues. He swallowed a small breath, then leaned into his mother, who gave the smallest nod of courage. Together they stepped across the line of shadow that marked the porch from the warm light of the human home. The father felt the hairs on his arms rise as though some invisible current had passed through him when their feet crossed the threshold. The moment held a gravity he could not explain, as though the balance of two worlds tilted ever so slightly toward something unknown. The child clutched tighter to his mother as his gaze darted across the unfamiliar walls. The pictures framed the furniture, the small signs of an ordinary life lived within these walls. He seemed overwhelmed, yet no fear showed in his eyes, only awe at the strangeness of what he was seeing. The mother moved slowly, guiding him further inside, her head bowed in silent gratitude, her presence commanding but careful, as though she carried not only her own dignity, but also the fragile trust being offered. The woman of the house stepped aside, fully making space, her eyes never leaving the child. She felt something stir within her, an instinct older than words, the recognition of another mother standing in her doorway, willing to risk everything for the safety of her child. It reached beyond fear, beyond differences. It was the common language of survival and love. The father closed the door softly behind them, the sound echoing through the quiet house, the act final yet strangely tender, as though sealing a promise he did not yet fully understand. The alien mother paused for a moment at the sound, then turned her gaze briefly toward him, her expression unreadable yet carrying a weight of respect. The air inside the home felt changed, no longer only a human space. It had become a fragile bridge to strangers, carrying the weight of different worlds, now bound by a single choice. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. It was the silence of possibility, the silence of something new taking its first breath within. For ordinary walls that night unfolded with a stillness that felt both fragile and profound. The alien mother settled near the corner of the living room, her tall frame folded into a posture of quiet watchfulness. The child leaned against her side, drifting between wakefulness and the exhaustion of a long journey, the faint glow of his eyes dimming as sleep claimed him. Little by little, the humans remained awake in the nearby chairs, their voices low, their hearts restless, uncertain of what they had chosen to allow into their home, yet unable to turn back. The woman of the house studied the child with the soft eyes of a parent. She saw the way his small hands curled against his mother's cloak, the way his breathing slowed once safety surrounded him, and though the strangeness of his form was undeniable, she could not see a threat in him. Only innocence, only need. Her chest tightened with the weight of that recognition, for she knew the bond of mother and child was the same, no matter what form it took. The father sat rigid, his gaze moving between the alien mother and the walls of his own home. He felt the boundaries of his world bending around him, his thoughts colliding with questions he had no answers for. Who were they? What had driven them here? What dangers followed them across the stars? Yet with every question came the same image, the child curling closer into safety, and he could not raise his heart against that image. The alien mother kept her silence, her head slightly bowed, her eyes watchful, yet softened by the rare stillness of knowing her child rested. She did not speak of the dangers she had fled. She did not ask what tomorrow might bring. She allowed herself only this moment to exist in peace within walls not her own. And in that moment she felt something fragile growing, the faintest thread of trust, woven not by words but by choices shared in silence. Hours passed and the quiet of the house deepened. The humans exchanged glances, heavy with the awareness that their lives had just shifted into something unfamiliar. The woman placed a blanket gently over the child, careful not to wake him. The mother tensed at first, then eased. When she saw the act was meant with kindness, it was a small gesture, but it carved a deeper mark than any promise it spoke of. Care freely given. When dawn began to press faint light against the curtains, the father finally allowed his shoulders to loosen. The world outside remained the same, yet everything within these walls felt changed. He looked at the alien mother who had not slept, her gaze steady and resolute. He realized then that she was not only a guest but also a guardian, never allowing her guard to lower until she was certain her child would live to see this new date. The first morning sounds crept through the neighborhood, birds calling, distant engines humming, life carrying on, unaware of what had taken place behind one closed door, and inside that door, to families, one human, one from beyond. Stars sat within the same fragile shelter, the weight of fear still present, yet softened by something stronger, by the undeniable truth that compassion had chosen to stand firm in the face of uncertainty. And in that choice, a fragile bond had been born.